Hi, this is Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I'm going to read you a poem called Ancestral Leaves, which I gave to an Indigenous man. The leaf I gave him, which accompanied the poem, was 118 years old. I can recall in Vietnam, actually, finding a leaf off a Bodhi tree, and I wrote a poem in thanks to a woman who was kind to me at the hotel. I actually had an electric shock when I tried to plug my computer in, and I was very upset. And the management of the hotel were very unsympathetic. But I met this lady by chance in the foyer, and I ended up writing her a poem, and I gave her a Bodhi leaf from the Bodhi tree, which is a simple symbol of Buddha. So that was a very beautiful moment. She actually took me for dinner when I didn't have much money at that time either. I've had a lot of wealth in my life, real wealth. So this is the wealth I gave to this man. It's called Ancestral Leaves. The powerful Indigenous mantra is identity with country, with land, with nature, with spirit. For to walk and leave a small footprint is the greatest testimony to peace and the encyclopedia of knowledge within bush wisdom. Preserves the environmental movement, for each can hold hands and learn and remember that we are all one land, one people, one heart. For that can be seen clearly, for we are the tree of humanity, and you and I are one leaf. For each of us can give shade or cast a shadow. I am choosing to share. I am choosing to care. For I respect diversity and embrace difference within unity, as friends, as family. This leaf is 118 years old, and I give it to you as a peace treaty, as a peace offering. For I can say sorry as I feel the pain, but really I want to say go for it. Leave the past behind. Await the leaf to drop to the ground. For when it is ripe, all will be forgiven. For our greatest power is truth, in reconciliation, in affiliation, in participation. For our world is great because of you. I will leave you with these ideas, for our true nature is harmony and cooperation, sharing and goodwill to all. For the rainbow serpent is in all colours. Mixed together becomes white light, and that is my dreaming. For each piece leaves an imprint on the earth. For the ancestors leave wisdom around the sacred fire to reflect and remember our sacred pact. So that was the poem I wrote for this wonderful man. I remember when I drove around Australia, when I was in the middle of nowhere, had all my life possessions in my car. It was great. Loved it. I was free. No rules, no regulations. I remember looking out to the horizon in every direction, and there was nothing, just red dirt. There wasn't even fences. There was just the bitumen road crossing the country. And I gave deep contemplation to the Indigenous people. I knew that we couldn't live very long out in the desert. I admired them deeply in those moments. I realised 50,000 years of oral history, of in-depth mapping, of different ways to retain and convey knowledge of the land resided within these mystical and silent people. When you meet with them, they sit quietly on the ground. And I thought of our cafe society, how we all have to go for a coffee. We sit on chairs. I remember when I went to Uluru. Now, this is a little bit of a mystical story, but life is mystical, whether you believe it or not. And I remember camping near Uluru. It was actually the end of my world trip. I saw really my travelling around Australia as completing the world trip that I did. I did that alone as well, and my intention was to overcome all fear. That was why I did it. Anyway, I saw the sign at Uluru that said, "Do not climb the rock." And of course, there were tourists climbing the rock, not respecting what the Indigenous people were asking. So I just said, okay, well, if you're real, your ancestors are real, then I'm putting out a request that if you don't want me to climb the rock, because I wanted to meditate up the top, then you have to send me a sign, I said. And then I let it go. Now, that night, when I was in my tent, I had a dream. And the dream was Indigenous women coming to me. They didn't say anything, but they impressed on me to walk the base. Of course, Uluru is rock, people might know it as 10-kilometre base. So I took that as most definitely a response, because I had never dreamed of Indigenous women coming to me ever. So I walked the base, and as I walked the base, I reflected on being them. This is the true meaning of empathy, by the way. It's not just standing in their shoes, it's actually living as they live. In that moment, the best I could do was really sit under a tree and imagine myself as Indigenous. I felt enormous peace and stillness within, because the land itself is at peace. So when we're close to the earth, it's only natural that we will become similar to the earth. We will vibrate at the same frequencies, what I'm feeling to say. And that frequency slows right down. There's not a busy mind happening. There's nothing happening. You're just in a space of emptiness. Now, this is where the real mystical world arises, is in that stillness. Those of us in the cognitive thinking world would barely know what it is to be still, if ever. But that is where the higher knowledge actually accesses. It's very interesting. So I walked around and just stopped and reflected, and I had a look at the Aboriginal art on the rock, on the side of the rock wall. And I didn't have, as some people might have, as a romanticised view of Indigenous people, not at all. I think life would have been tough out there, and I'm sure the tribes were having little wars. There would have been, ethical issues they would have had to have dealt with through their own tribal custom. So this is not an idealised view, it's just a sense of reflecting on a people with vast knowledge, as vast as the country itself. And when you look up and see the eagles flying over, the wedgetails, and when you see the lizards scampering around, and you go to some of their sacred sites, I went to Devil's Marbles in the Northern Territory. That was like, coming to a new planet. These were the huge sandstone rocks that were round, and they looked like pebbles. They looked like giant pebbles that had been plonked, is the only word I can think of, in clusters. It looked very strange. And this was, a sacred space where I think it was secret women's business, I think, from memory. The Olgas, or how's it go, Catatuja. The Olgas are actually connected to Uluru. There's an underground connection. It's a big mountain system. Now, when I saw that configuration of rock, that looked like a moonscape. There were huge, big, round holes in it. It looked like a lunarscape. You could actually film something from there. There was a majesty about it and a sense of reverence as well. Kings Canyon was also an amazing place. And they had what they call the Garden of Eden in there, where there were actual plants from 100,000 years ago. I picked up a rock, which I called my philosopher's stone, and I ended up giving that to my father. I told him if he rubs this rock, there's magic. And to my amazement, my dad's very conservative, like he's not into the magic at all. When I saw him, I said, "Do you still have the rock?" Because it had lichen. It looked like a little mountain. And he said he did. And he said he rubs it. He gets people to pat it. Maybe it was a pet rock after all. But yeah, that experience travelling Australia, I've had many experiences at Wave Rock in Western Australia as well. Just this really deep sense that we don't even know our own country. The Indigenous have an idea, but even they're starting to lose the knowledge because of their indoctrination into the Western culture. But what I would say to any of them who are listening to this, the higher knowledge was inherent within your people for 50,000 years. The knowledge you've taken on with the Western society whilst you've had to do it in order to be able to converse with people very different from your ancestral past, their knowledge was not as high as yours. You had real knowledge of your true nature, and that is the highest knowledge. The rest of it is interesting in that we get to explore our solar systems through probes and satellites, and we can drive around in cars, and we have all these technologies. And that, I guess, was the human exploration of life outside itself. But the real knowledge is the words that are coming to me is feminine. It's the feminine. I'm not saying females, I'm saying the feminine, which is the receptive. It's the nurturing. It's the connectedness with nature. Yeah, that's where deeper truths arise in a very different way, because nature doesn't speak the same language as us. We are learning to speak the language of nature. It's the other way around. And the energy that has created all of nature is of great interest because we have come from the same source. So the poem I've read out is really about letting go of the past, and I have spoken with elders recently who have, of their own volition, indicated to me that it's now time for unity, and they're quite right. They are saying it's time to drop the past. It's time to move from the pain and the suffering and the feeling of being a victim to a new vision of who you really are, which is one with nature. We're all nature, so it's one with everybody. The oneness is really about seeing ourselves in each other all over the world. This is the reunification of humanity with itself. We are same but different, but we are more similar than different. When you look through the prism of love at each other, you will only see a reflection of family. When you look through critique or superiority or inferiority, or from a various cultural perspective, and you look at the other as less, then you're coming from ego. And that is not oneness. The unity means it's time to come home. And that is where we're all heading. And we're going to converge at the same time. So we are indeed each other's brothers and sisters. So that's my message to the Indigenous people, not only here in Australia, but all over the world. And I thank you for your unbelievable contribution to awareness that we are one with nature. I'm sure nature is thanking you right back. So I send you peace and love and unity. Bye.